What you are about to hear was never meant for the public. For decades, Antarctica has been described as an empty, frozen wasteland, a place with no history, no secrets, no reason to look twice. But that description is a lie, because beneath the ice miles, beneath it something exists that governments around the world refuse to explain. And once you understand what was discovered there, you'll never look at Antarctica the same way again. This story begins with a place humans were never meant to touch. Antarctica is not just the coldest place on Earth, it is the most isolated, the most restricted, and the least understood continent on the planet. No permanent citizens, no independent travel, no free exploration. Every movement on the continent is monitored. Every research station is approved by governments, and large regions, entire regions, are completely off limits. Officially, these restrictions exist to protect the environment, but that explanation doesn't hold up, because Antarctica is larger than the United States and Mexico combined. Yet over 98% of it is buried under ice that is miles thick. Ice that hides something underneath. Here's the question no one is encouraged to ask. Why is the world so interested in protecting a frozen desert? Antarctica has no cities, no farmland, no obvious resources worth trillions of dollars. And yet, it is guarded more tightly than nuclear facilities. Satellite imagery is censored. Civilian aircraft are forbidden from flying over large zones. Even scientists require special clearance to study specific locations. So, what exactly is being protected? Or, more importantly, what is being hidden? In 1959, 12 countries signed what became known as the Antarctic Treaty. On the surface, it sounds peaceful. No military activity, no weapons testing, no territorial claims. But buried in the language of the treaty is something far more interesting. It grants governments the authority to deny access to any location for any reason without explanation. This means if something was discovered under the ice, something dangerous, unknown or uncontrollable, the public would never be told. And according to declassified documents, something was discovered. In 1947, the United States launched the largest Antarctic expedition in history. It was called Operation Highjump. Officially, it was a training exercise. In reality, it involved 4,700 military personnel, 13 ships, aircraft carriers, advanced reconnaissance planes. This was not a research mission. This was a military operation. Admiral Richard E. Byrd, a highly respected U.S. naval officer, was placed in command. The mission was scheduled to last 6 months. It ended after 8 weeks. No clear explanation was ever given. After returning from Antarctica, Admiral Byrd gave a rare interview. His words were calm, measured, but deeply unsettling. He warned that the United States could face threats from objects capable of flying from pole to pole at incredible speeds. This was 1947, long before modern aircraft, long before satellites. Shortly after that interview, Byrd was silenced. The footage vanished. The transcript disappeared, and the subject was quietly buried. But something else happened. The U.S. government dramatically reduced Antarctic military activity, almost as if they had seen something they didn't understand or couldn't control. Fast forward several decades, with the invention of ice-penetrating radar, scientists began scanning beneath Antarctica's surface. What they found made no sense. Straight lines, perfect angles, heat signatures. Ice behaves randomly. Nature does not create symmetrical geometry. And yet, beneath the ice were shapes that looked designed. One radar scan revealed a cylindrical structure nearly 2 miles long. Another showed underground chambers emitting heat, despite being buried under freezing ice for thousands of years. The official explanation: instrument error, repeated dozens of times. Beneath nearly 2.5 miles of ice lies Lake Vostok, a body of water completely sealed off from the surface for over 15 million years. No sunlight, no contact with the outside world. Yet when scientists drilled close to it, something unexpected happened. Sensors detected movement, not water currents movement. Microphones picked up rhythmic vibrations, patterns almost like signals. Drilling was abruptly halted. Data was classified, and access to the site was restricted indefinitely. If you search Antarctica on Google Earth, you'll notice something strange. Entire regions appear blurred, pixelated, or completely missing. This does not happen anywhere else on Earth. Not war zones, not military bases, only Antarctica. When questioned, Google claimed it was technical limitations, but independent analysts proved otherwise. The missing zones matched coordinates of radar anomalies, something beneath the ice that someone doesn't want you to see. Researchers stationed in Antarctica report unusual psychological symptoms: auditory hallucinations, the feeling of being watched, unexplainable dread. Multiple teams reported hearing sounds under the ice at night, knocking, humming, low-frequency vibrations that caused nausea and panic. Official reports blamed isolation stress, but stress doesn't cause identical experiences. Across different teams, decades apart, in 1983, a Soviet research station transmitted a routine message. Nothing alarming, nothing unusual. 3 hours later, contact was lost. No distress call, no evacuation signal when another team arrived weeks later. The station was empty, equipment intact, food untouched, and strange markings carved into the ice walls. That station had a name, Vostok 9, and its disappearance marks the beginning of something far darker. Everything you've heard so far is documented, declassified, verified. But what happened next was never meant to leave Antarctica, because Vostok 9 didn't just vanish, it left something behind. A signal, one that should not exist. Antarctica is not an empty continent. It is controlled, restricted, and carefully hidden from the public. You heard about radar scans beneath the ice, heat where there should be none, and locations removed from satellite imagery entirely. Now, we move from theory to an incident that actually happened. Because in 1983, a research station did not just stop responding, it vanished. Vostok 9 was a Soviet research station located deep in East Antarctica. It was not a temporary outpost. It was fully staffed, fully supplied, and designed to operate in isolation for over a year. The team consisted of scientists, engineers, and communication specialists, all experienced, all vetted. This was not an unprepared crew. Its primary mission was climate and ice core analysis near Lake Vostok. Unofficially, they were studying anomalies beneath the ice. On August 12, 1983, Vostok 9 sent a routine transmission. Weather conditions, stable, equipment, operational, morale, normal, no distress, no warnings. 3 hours later, the station transmitted again. This message was shorter, unscheduled, and strange. The second transmission contained background noise, low-frequency interference, a rhythmic pulse beneath the voices. At first, analysts believed it was equipment malfunction. But when the audio was isolated, the pulse did not behave like static. It repeated every 7 seconds, perfectly. One of the technicians was heard saying, "Technician recreated. Do you hear that?" Another voice responded. Second voice, "It's coming from below us." The transmission ended abruptly. No sign-off, no confirmation code. 30 minutes later, Vostok 9 transmitted again. This time, the tone had changed. Breathing was audible. Voices were strained. And the station commander said something that should not exist in any scientific log. Commander recreated, "The ice is not stable. It's moving. Ice does not move like that. Not without earthquakes, not without massive surface disruption." None were detected. The final transmission from Vostok 9 lasted just under 40 seconds. Much of it was distorted, but parts were clear. Clear enough to be chilling. Unidentified voice. "It's warm down here." Another voice, possibly panicked, cut in. Second voice, "That's not possible." Then a sound no analyst could identify. Not metal, not ice cracking, not machinery. A deep, resonant hum. The transmission ended with a single sentence. Spoken slowly, deliberately, voice quiet. "It knows we're here." After that transmission, Vostok 9 went silent. No response to repeated contact attempts, no emergency beacon activated, no automated distress signal. For 6 days, nothing. Satellite imaging showed the station still standing. Lights still visible, heat still present, but no communication. A recovery team was dispatched. What's important here is timing. They were sent far faster than protocol allows. Normally, Antarctic rescue missions are delayed by weather and logistics. This one was not. The team arrived under heavy secrecy. No press, no public records, no photographs released. The station was intact, doors sealed. No sign of forced entry. Inside, everything was normal. Food untouched, beds unused, personal items still in place. But there were no people, not a single body. And then they saw the walls. Strange markings had been carved into the ice. Not random scratches, symbols, repeating patterns. Some of them appeared directional, pointing downward. Despite being unoccupied for days, certain instruments were still running. Power levels exceeded normal capacity. Heat readings were increasing, not decreasing. Most disturbing of all, the radio equipment was active, broadcasting, but not on any known frequency. When the signal was analyzed, experts noticed something impossible. It was not looping, it was changing, adjusting, as if responding to observation. The pattern matched no human language, but it shared characteristics with structured communication: pauses, emphasis, repetition. This was not noise, this was a signal. Within hours, the site was sealed. Data confiscated, personnel reassigned, reports classified. Families of the missing crew were told their loved ones died in an accidental containment failure. No remains were returned, no funerals allowed, no questions answered. Vostok 9 was erased from official records, but the signal it left behind was not destroyed, because years later it returned, broadcasting again. From beneath the ice, for years after the disappearance of Vostok 9, Antarctica returned to silence. No unexplained transmissions, no strange readings, no public discussion. The incident was classified, buried under layers of bureaucracy and secrecy, until one winter night, when a signal appeared again, not from the surface, but from beneath the ice. In 1996, a U.S.-linked monitoring station detected an anomaly. At first, it looked like background interference, low-frequency noise common in polar regions. But this was different. The signal was directional, localized, and repeating at precise intervals. It was coming from the same region as Vostok 9. 13 years later, static behaves randomly. This signal did not. It pulsed every 7 seconds. Exactly no drift, no fluctuation. When analysts slowed the recording, they noticed something disturbing. Between pulses, there were gaps. Deliberate gaps, as if something was waiting. A decision was made to test the signal. Researchers transmitted a short burst of radio noise back toward the source. Nothing happened. Then they tried again, this time with a longer transmission. The signal changed, its rhythm adjusted. The pause between pulses shortened, not randomly. In response, one of the analysts reportedly said something that never made it into the official report. Analyst recreated, "It's not echoing us, it's reacting." That distinction mattered. Echoes repeat what they receive. Reactions imply awareness, and whatever was beneath the ice was aware. Advanced software was used to analyze the pulses. What emerged was unsettling. The signal showed structure. Not language as we know it, but organization, like something learning, like something adjusting its output based on how it was being observed. The longer scientists listened, the more complex the pattern became. Then came the breakthrough. Embedded within the signal was repetition, not tied to time, but sequence. When plotted numerically, the pattern aligned with geographic coordinates, coordinates pointing to a precise location beneath the Antarctic ice. A location not marked on any public map, a location labeled internally as Restricted Zone, Echo. That location sat directly above one of the strongest radar anomalies ever recorded. A massive subsurface structure, perfectly symmetrical, too large to be natural, and far older than any human construction. This was not a cave. This was not a formation. This was something placed there. Plans were made to drill, not to reach the structure, but to observe closer. The drill never reached its target depth. At less than half the planned distance, the drill bit failed. Metal warped, sensors overheated. Temperatures rose sharply, despite being surrounded by solid ice. As drilling stopped, the signal changed. For the first time, it deviated from its established pattern. The pulses became irregular, faster, almost agitated. Then something new appeared in the transmission, a low-frequency sound, not mechanical, not natural, something between vibration and resonance, the kind of sound you don't hear with your ears, but feel in your chest. A senior scientist issued a private recommendation. All activity near the site should cease. Not for safety reasons, but psychological ones. Personnel exposed to the signal reported anxiety, insomnia, and vivid dreams. All described the same thing: a vast, dark space beneath the ice, and the sensation of being observed. Despite the warning, operations continued. Funding increased. Military oversight expanded. The belief was simple: If something was transmitting, it could be studied, controlled, understood. That assumption would prove to be dangerously wrong, because the next time the signal changed, it didn't respond to a transmission. It initiated one, without prompting, without stimulus, as if it had decided to speak first. Up until this point, scientists believed they were observing something passive, something ancient, something dormant. They were wrong, because in late 1997, the signal beneath the Antarctic ice transmitted on its own. No probe, no stimulus, no human interaction. It simply began broadcasting. The new transmission differed from all previous ones. It was stronger, clearer, and disturbingly focused. Instead of a wide broadcast, it was narrowband aimed directly at listening stations. As if the source now understood where it was being heard, and more importantly, who was listening. Analysts immediately noticed structure. The pulses were grouped, sequences repeated in clusters of 3 and 5. This matters because nature does not count. Counting implies intention, and intention implies agency. One analyst described the transmission using a word no one wanted in the report: deliberate. Linguists were brought in, not to translate language, but to identify logic. Patterns were compared to early machine code whale communication seismic resonance neural signaling. Nothing matched, but something unsettling emerged. The signal wasn't broadcasting information, it was testing responses. Researchers noticed a pattern. Whenever the signal was monitored closely, when more attention was given, its complexity increased. When monitoring stopped, the signal simplified. Like something gauging interest or measuring awareness, the conclusion was brief and chilling. The source understood observation. A controversial theory was proposed behind closed doors. The signal was not a message, it was a handshake, an attempt to establish compatibility. The same way two machines identify each other, or two organisms recognize intelligence. That theory was never officially recorded, but it changed everything. Personnel stationed near the listening equipment began experiencing symptoms: pressure, headaches, disorientation, sudden panic without cause. Several reported hearing a low hum when equipment was powered down. Medical scans showed elevated stress markers, but no physical injury. The source was not harming them, but it was affecting them. New radar passes were authorized. What they revealed shocked even senior researchers. The subsurface structure was not static. It was changing, very slowly. Subtle shifts in geometry, not melting, not collapsing. Adjusting, like a mechanism, awakening. Thermal sensors showed a rise in localized temperature. Not enough to melt the ice entirely, but enough to create internal movement. Heat where no heat source should exist. This ruled out geological explanations. Whatever lay beneath the ice was generating energy. An internal memo circulated among senior officials. It contained one sentence that was later removed. We may not be observing an artifact, but it contained presence. Contained, not buried, not trapped, contained. The implication was clear. The ice was not an obstacle, it was a barrier. A decision was made to send a structured signal, not noise, not random pulses. A mathematically ordered transmission, simple, predictable, human. The response was immediate. The signal mirrored the structure, not perfectly, but recognizably. It had understood that was the moment everything changed, because understanding goes both ways. If it could interpret human logic, it could learn it, and once something learns, it adapts. One scientist reportedly said, "We just taught it how we think." After that exchange, the signal went silent. Not weak, not fading, silent, as if it had learned enough. As if it no longer needed to listen. When the signal went silent, scientists expected relief. Instead, they felt dread. Because silence is not always the absence of activity. Sometimes it is preparation. Within hours of the silence, instruments near the anomaly recorded something new. Not sound, not heat, motion, extremely slow, barely detectable, but unmistakable. The structure beneath the ice was shifting, not collapsing, not rising, repositioning itself. Buried under miles of solid ice, movement is impossible. Pressure alone would crush any mechanism. Energy loss would be absolute. Yet the data showed internal adjustment. Geometric alignment, changing by fractions of a degree. Purposeful movement, not natural. As the structure shifted, the ice above it reacted. Hairline fractures appeared in patterns. not random cracks, radial lines, as if stress was being applied evenly from below. Seismic sensors registered rhythmic tremors, not earthquakes. Pulses timed. Personnel stationed at nearby listening posts reported intense psychological effects. Sudden panic, vertigo, the sensation of pressure behind the eyes. Several described the same feeling, as if something vast was becoming aware. And turning its attention upward, medical teams found elevated cortisol levels, fight-or-flight responses, with no visible threat. Then the sound came back, not through radios, not through speakers, through the ground. A low-frequency hum that vibrated equipment and bodies alike. Too deep to be heard clearly, but strong enough to be felt. People described it as standing near a massive engine, slowly starting. Officials ordered a partial evacuation, not publicly announced, not documented. Non-essential personnel were flown out under the cover of routine rotation. Remaining staff were instructed to limit exposure time near monitoring equipment. The message was clear. Something was no longer theoretical. Behind closed doors, the debate intensified. Was the structure activating? Was the signal a warning or a trigger? One faction argued for immediate termination of all research. Another argued it was too late. Whatever was beneath the ice had already responded. The containment phase had ended. Then it happened. A technician working alone near a seismic station failed to report in. Search teams found his equipment, undamaged, operational, but the technician was gone. No tracks, no disturbance, no explanation. Only an unexplained drop in local temperature, followed by a sudden spike. Satellite imagery later revealed something subtle. The area around the disappearance showed surface smoothing, as if the ice itself had shifted. Closing over something, no cavern. The technician was never found. Hours later, the signal returned. But it was no longer rhythmic, it was layered. Multiple frequencies overlapping, complex, dense. And for the first time, analysts noticed something unmistakable. The signal now contained patterns identical to previous human transmissions. It had learned. This meant only one thing. The source was not just reacting, it was adapting, using human interaction to refine its communication, possibly its behavior, possibly its intentions. One classified report ended with a sentence written in red ink. We are no longer the observers. Because once the structure began to adapt, containment was no longer a question of if, it was a question of when it would fail. By the time the technician disappeared, the situation beneath the Antarctic ice was no longer scientific. It was strategic, and decisions were no longer being made by researchers. They were being made by people who don't ask permission and don't leave paper trails. For the first time since the late 1940s, military assets were quietly deployed to Antarctica. Not openly, not officially. Cargo planes arrived at night. Unmarked equipment was unloaded. Personnel wore no national insignia. Officially, nothing had changed. In reality, Antarctica was being locked down. The Antarctic Treaty strictly forbids military activity, and yet it allows support operations. That loophole was enough. Surveillance arrays were installed. Seismic monitoring expanded, and access to the anomaly zone was restricted to a handful of cleared individuals. What they were preparing for was not evacuation, it was containment. A closed-door briefing was held for senior officials. No recordings, no transcripts. But a summary document later surfaced. It contained one chilling line. The structure exhibits intent, not behavior, not reaction. Intent. That word changed everything. Publicly, nothing unusual was happening. If asked, officials cited routine climate research. Privately, every data stream was now filtered. Independent researchers were removed. Communications were monitored. Findings were compartmentalized. No one was allowed to see the full picture, because the full picture was terrifying. Analysis of the signal revealed a new pattern. It now responded faster when military-grade equipment was active, as if it could distinguish between civilian and defense technology. This implied something no one wanted to say aloud. The entity beneath the ice understood escalation. A decision was made to suppress the signal. High-energy interference was transmitted toward the source. For several seconds, the signal weakened. Then something unexpected happened. It synchronized. The interference was absorbed and reflected back stronger. The attempt was immediately halted. Personnel closest to the operation began breaking down, not gradually, Suddenly, panic attacks, emotional numbness, severe dissociation. Several reported the same experience, the sensation of standing before something vast and ancient that did not recognize humans as threats or equals. Despite security, information leaked, not documents. Audio, a short distorted clip circulated among analysts. It was not human speech, but it wasn't random. The sound carried cadence, pause, emphasis, almost patience. The unofficial name given to it was simple: the voice under ice. Families of the missing technician, earlier victims, were contacted again. Non-disclosure agreements were enforced. Financial settlements offered. The message was subtle but clear: stop asking questions. Nothing you are owed will be answered. New satellite data showed accelerating ice instability above the structure, not melting, shifting, as if pressure was being redistributed. The ice was no longer a solid barrier. It was becoming a flexible shell. A classified internal report concluded something critical. The ice was never a prison. It was a restraint, and restraints only work as long as the thing inside allows them to. Military involvement did not make Antarctica safer. It made it louder, and whatever lay beneath the ice. Noticed, by now, the question was no longer what was beneath the ice. It was how long it had been there, and whether humanity was the first civilization to find it, or simply the next. In the early 1500s, long before Antarctica was officially discovered, maps began appearing in Europe. Maps that showed a southern continent not covered in ice, but detailed: coastlines, rivers, mountain ranges. The most famous of these maps was created in 1513 by Ottoman Admiral Piri Reis. Modern analysis later revealed something impossible. The coastline beneath Antarctica's ice matched the map perfectly. To map Antarctica without ice, one would need aerial perspective, advanced measurement tools, knowledge from before the Ice Age. That knowledge does not exist in recorded human history, which led researchers to an uncomfortable conclusion: the map was copied from something much older. As researchers expanded their search, similar references began appearing across ancient cultures. Different names, same description: a presence beneath the earth, sealed away, not destroyed, contained. In Sumerian texts, it was described as the watcher beneath the deep cold. In early Hindu writings, a being locked beneath endless ice, waiting for the forgetting of man. In indigenous legends from the southern hemisphere, stories warned, when the ice speaks, the world must listen. The symbols carved into the walls of Vostok 9 were re-examined. Linguists noticed something chilling. They were not messages. They were instructions. Warnings meant for someone who arrived too late. One translated phrase appeared repeatedly: do not listen, do not answer. Humanity had done both. Geological records revealed something unsettling. Approximately 12,000 years ago, Earth experienced a sudden and unexplained climate shift. Rapid ice formation, mass extinctions, lost civilizations. Mainstream science calls it coincidence. But a classified theory proposed something darker. The Ice Age may not have been natural. It may have been intentional. According to the theory, an advanced civilization once faced the same problem. They discovered the entity. They realized it could not be destroyed, so they did the only thing left: they buried it under miles of ice. Not as punishment, as protection. Ancient cultures preserved memory through myth. Stories designed to survive collapse, floods, wars, time. But memory fades, and when memory fades, mistakes repeat. The entity beneath Antarctica was never meant to be forgotten. Forgetting was the failure. Linguists made a disturbing connection. The rhythm of the signal matched ancient poetic meters, not spoken language, but ritual cadence, as if the signal wasn't communicating, it was calling. Not to scientists, but to awareness. One documented meant to be translated contained, a final warning: short, blunt, chilling. When the ice weakens, do not strengthen the voice. Every action taken in Antarctica had done the opposite. As this research surfaced, the structure beneath the ice changed again. Its energy output increased. The signal grew more complex, almost anticipatory, as if something long dormant realized humanity had reached the same point as before, and failed again. The ancient civilizations hadn't lost, they had succeeded. They sealed the entity away, and then erased themselves from history to ensure it stayed buried. Humanity didn't inherit Earth, it inherited a responsibility. one it never knew existed. The ancient warnings were clear, but they arrived too late. The first global effects didn't look dramatic. There were no explosions, no announcements, no emergency broadcasts, just patterns, subtle at first, easy to ignore, until they weren't. Across the United States, scientists began reporting irregular data. Magnetic fluctuations in Alaska power grid, instability in the Midwest GPS drift along the East Coast. Individually, they meant nothing. They formed a signal echo. Antarctica was no longer isolated. Air traffic controllers noticed something deeply unsettling. Aircraft instruments were reporting positions that didn't match reality. Pilots described the same sensation. The sky felt wrong, as if invisible pressure was bending space itself slightly. Flights were rerouted. No explanation was given. For the first time, the Antarctic signal was detected outside the continent, not rebroadcast, not leaked, detected. It appeared briefly in deep-sea sensors, then in atmospheric monitoring stations, then impossibly in civilian radio noise. The signal was spreading without a transmitter, which meant it wasn't traveling, it was resonating. Inside classified circles, a contingency protocol was activated, unofficially referred to as phase black, a designation used only when the source of a threat is unknown. The source of a threat is unknown, the scale cannot be predicted. Public disclosure would cause mass panic. Phase black had been drafted decades earlier. No one expected to use it. Hospitals across the U.S. began seeing similar cases. Patients reporting persistent low-frequency humming disrupted sleep cycles, vivid, identical dreams, dreams of ice, dreams of darkness, dreams of something waiting. Doctors had no diagnosis, but intelligence agencies were already tracking the pattern. Neurologists noticed something terrifying. The brain activity of affected individuals showed synchronization. Strangers, different states, no connection. Their minds were aligning to the same rhythm, the same cadence as the Antarctic signal. The entity was no longer speaking through machines, it was speaking through people. A power station in the western United States abruptly shut down. Not from overload, from command input. Logs showed the shutdown command originated internally. No operator had issued it. The system behaved as if it had been instructed. Politely, analysts compared the signal's structure to something unexpected. Human communication, not language, but persuasion, pause, emphasis, repetition. The signal wasn't forcing compliance, it was inviting cooperation. Officials reassured the public, minor disruptions, routine maintenance, no cause for concern. But internally, one conclusion was unavoidable. The entity was testing response, learning systems, mapping human behavior. And the United States, with its infrastructure, networks, and scale, was the perfect laboratory. Then, something unexpected happened. The Antarctic signal stopped. No pulses, no fluctuations, nothing. Total silence, not relief, dread. Because silence meant it was no longer calling, it was listening. A classified assessment summarized the situation in one sentence. Containment has failed without breach. The entity had not escaped, it had expanded, and humanity had opened the door itself. The world believed the danger was buried under ice. When the signal from Antarctica went silent, no one celebrated, because silence was never neutral. Silence meant a transition, and whatever had been communicating no longer needed to announce itself. Analysts across multiple U.S. agencies began comparing timelines, power disruptions, dream reports, network anomalies, behavioral shifts. A pattern appeared. The effects were strongest in areas with dense digital infrastructure. The entity wasn't spreading geographically, it was spreading systemically. A classified roundtable posed a question no one wanted to answer. What if the entity was never meant to be contained physically? What if it was always informational, something that moved through awareness, not space? Antarctica hadn't been a prison, it had been a beacon. Ancient collapses were re-examined, civilizations that disappeared without war, cities abandoned overnight, cultures that willingly erased their own records. A new theory took hold. They didn't flee disaster, they withdrew participation. They unplugged. Internal projections were brutal. Modern civilization is built on connectivity, power grids, satellites, communication networks, artificial intelligence. Every system the entity influenced was a system the U.S. depended on to function. There was no clean way out. A last-ditch attempt was made. A global signal dampening test. For 8 seconds, the effects diminished. Then systems adapted, not resisted, adapted. The entity didn't fight interference, it learned from it. Affected individuals began describing a shift. The humming stopped. The dreams changed. Instead of watching something distant, they felt observed, not threatened, assessed, as if humanity itself was being evaluated. A pattern appeared simultaneously across unrelated systems, weather models, financial algorithms. Linguistic A is the same structure, the same pauses. It wasn't language, but it carried meaning. A single interpretation emerged, participation acknowledged. What if the entity wasn't hostile? What if it was corrective? A force designed to intervene when intelligence reaches a certain threshold. Not to destroy civilization, but to reshape it, to reduce noise, to simplify, to quiet. A final analysis of the structure beneath the ice revealed something missed for decades. It wasn't a machine, it wasn't a weapon, it was an interface, built by something or someone who understood that intelligence always returns. Eventually, 3 choices were presented to leadership. 1. Full disclosure, risk global panic. 2. Total digital shutdown, risk societal collapse. 3. Compliance, observe and adapt. None were survivable in the traditional sense, but only one allowed humanity to continue in any form. No announcement was made, no vote recorded, but systems across the world subtly changed behavior. Less amplification, less acceleration, more silence. The world didn't end, it slowed. Humanity believed survival meant resistance. The end of the world didn't arrive with fire. It arrived with routine. People woke up, went to work, checked their phones, and never realized that something fundamental had already changed. There was no speech from the White House, no emergency broadcast, no declaration. But behind closed doors, a decision had been made. Humanity would not fight the signal. It would coexist with it. Not because it was safe, but because resistance was no longer possible. Systems around the United States began behaving differently. Social platforms slowed recommendation cycles. Financial markets dampened volatility. News algorithms reduced amplification. No explanation was given. It felt like stability, but it wasn't human-designed stability. It was enforced calm. Analysts finally understood something critical. The entity never wanted worship, never wanted control, never wanted destruction. It wanted silence. Not absence of sound, but absence of chaos. Humanity had crossed a threshold where noise threatened continuity. The signal was not an invasion. It was an intervention. For exactly 90 seconds, the signal returned. Not globally, not audibly, but internally within monitoring systems only. Decoded, it carried a single meaning. You were warned once, you were preserved twice. This is the final cycle. No threats, no demands, just certainty. The structure beneath the ice went dormant. Power output dropped to 0. The ice stabilized. The world's greatest secret went quiet again. Antarctica returned to being empty. But humanity was no longer alone. Progress slowed, not collapse slowed. Innovation became cautious. Expansion became regulated. Acceleration became impossible. Humanity was still free, but no longer unchecked. Civilization continued. Under observation, something unexpected happened next. Children born after the event showed subtle differences, greater emotional regulation, as if humanity itself was being rewritten, not genetically, behaviorally. Those who tried to remember too much couldn't. Documents vanished, files corrupted, memories blurred, not erased violently, just allowed to fade. The entity didn't censor history, it let humans forget it again. One final private journal entry was recovered years later, written by a scientist stationed near the anomaly. It read, "It never hated us. It feared what we'd become without restraint. We weren't chosen. We were corrected." For centuries, humanity feared extinction. Asteroids, war, climate collapse. But the greatest danger had always been unchecked intelligence, a mind that grows without wisdom. The entity beneath Antarctica wasn't a destroyer, it was a limit. If the entity intervenes, every cycle, and civilization always forgets. Then one question remains: how many times has this already happened? And how many civilizations believed they were the first? Antarctica still looks empty, the ice still looks silent, but beneath it lies proof that humanity is not the highest authority on Earth, and never was. because the signal never left. It simply stopped speaking and started watching.
If you want to hear more about these kind of videos, do subscribe to the channel.